Let's do this.
Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you are live.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlene Glover, and I am the account manager for TD Small Business Banking, covering the Orangeville and surrounding area. On behalf of TD Bank and our partners in this event, the Town of Orangeville and FedDev Ontario, I'd like to welcome you to the first ever virtual Orangeville Economic Outlook Summit. As many of you know, the annual Economic Outlook Breakfast is normally a great opportunity for the business community to get together, to network, and connect with one another. This morning, you will hear about the latest economic trends influencing the globe, our country, our province, and our local community. This year, due to COVID restrictions, we're pleased to be hosting this event live and online, and we're pleased to see so many participants from our community and from around the province. Today, we're happy to welcome back James Marple, Managing Director and Senior Economist at TD. We also look forward to hearing from 3 local business owners who will share their stories of not only survival, but resilience and innovation throughout this pandemic crisis. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Orangeville Mayor Sandy Brown to bring greetings on behalf of the Town of Orangeville.
Thank you very much, Arlene. On behalf of the Town of Orangeville, I'd like to welcome everyone to our annual Orangeville Economic Outlook Summit. For the first time since the breakfast began in 2003, we're hosting this virtually, and we're pleased to welcome all attendees, not only from the Town of Orangeville, but from across our region and other areas of the province. Town's pleased to be co-hosting this morning's event with our partner, the TD Bank Group. TD is a strong supporter of our community and its businesses, and we are pleased to have such a productive relationship with the bank. Thank you for supporting our businesses' development efforts. We also like to acknowledge the contribution of FedDev, which has supported this morning's event, and thank them for their ongoing support of small business development. The Town of Orangeville is supported by its Business and Economic Development Advisory Committee, and I'd like to recognize our volunteers for the 2019-2022 term, including Councillor Joe Andrews, our EDC Chair, Pete Renshaw, Vice Chair, Buddy Pitt, Wendy Edwards, Paul Servini, Linda Horn, Sokeen Singh, and Diana Morris. Thank you all. Small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of our community and our economy, accounting for 90% of all Canadian companies and employing about 95% of private sector workers. More than 2,700 businesses are operating in Orangeville, and these operations employ 13,000 people. These businesses create jobs, they create diverse revenue streams, and they support other businesses by buying local. It's been an extraordinary year. The town has been diligent in its efforts to bring you the latest news, incentives, and recovery resources and other help as our business owners work to operate during the pandemic. The town recognizes that businesses will need to adopt new and innovative ways of conducting business, and we're working to provide the infrastructure for our business community needs. We've launched a $56 million fiber project with Whiteman Telecom, and installations are now underway in our business park, bringing reliable high-speed internet access across the community. With the goal of improving our lines of communication and engagement, a new website has been launched to provide easy access to information and resources that you need. Our council continues to examine new ways of conducting business and bringing efficiencies to our businesses and residents, adopting smart cities technology projects, adapting bylaws and practices to fit our reality, and investing in projects that will support our economic and recovery and growth. I'm very pleased to welcome everyone today, and like you, I look forward to learning about the economic forecast for this upcoming year. I hope you all enjoy this morning's presentation. And James, I'm really looking forward to hearing with the presidential election 7 days away and the recovery from the pandemic all on the table. It's going to be very interesting to hear you. So thank you very much. All the best, everyone.
TD is a proud sponsor of the town's annual economic event and of the business development activities of the Orangeville and Small Business Enterprise Centre. We've worked closely together for many years and have been pleased to support the excellent work of the Economic Development Office. The Small Business Enterprise Centre provides business counseling and advice, business registration assistance, mentorship, referrals, entrepreneurship training, and many more services for people wanting to start, expand, or buy a business. This year has been particularly challenging as the majority of these services have gone online, but the Economic Development and Culture Small Business Enterprise Center office has provided seamless services to our region's business community. TD is pleased to support these initiatives, and today I'm pleased to announce that TD is supporting the work of the Small Business Enterprise Center with a contribution of $10,000.
Yes, I want to, on behalf of the town of Orangeville, thank TD Bank for this generous donation, and we're looking forward to putting that money to good use in the town. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy Brown. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce our keynote speaker, James Marple, Managing Director and Senior Economist at TD. James received his Master of Arts degree in economics in 2005 and has over 10 years experience as a professional economist. James joined TD as an economist in October 2007. In his current role as Managing Director and Senior Economist, James works with a team of financial experts to provide an analysis and forecast for the global economy with a focus on North America. He also contributes to a wide variety of TD publications, writing on such topics as the housing market, inflation, and monetary policy. Today, his analysis is referred to frequently in the financial press, and today, please help me to welcome James Marple.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll get started. I'm just gonna share my screen here and get this going. Okay, all right. Thank you. A little bit different than last year, but hopefully you can probably see my little picture here in the background, but that's okay. But yes, I'd like to take you sort of similar to last year, although very different in terms of the economic circumstances, but a 10,000-foot view of the economic outlook. I'll talk a bit about the near-term consequences, obviously, of the virus and on the economy, but I'd also like to talk a little bit about some of the longer-term implications, the way this really has changed the world for ill or for good as we come out of this virus over the next hopefully year and a bit. So, okay. So the first thing I think we have to reference is that perhaps unlike the past, the economic outlook is so dependent on the course of the pandemic, and that will depend obviously on treatment and on vaccines, but as well the actions of policymakers, both to limit activity in order to limit the spread of the virus, but also the support measures that they've put in place to try to bridge the economy through this difficult period. What we've seen more recently is we continue to see a rise in cases globally. We've seen a big increase, obviously, in Europe, but also in North America, and Canada is now into a second wave of cases. In the United States, they're really actually more into a third wave, their second wave happening earlier through the summer. But there have been some improvements in treatment, and we don't see the same spike in deaths that happened earlier in the crisis. And also the response of policymakers to the recent surge has been very different than the initial lockdown and stay-at-home orders that really shut the economy off like a light switch in the earlier part of this year in much of the world. We have seen now for example, in Ontario, various places have moved from phase 3 back into phase 2, limiting indoor dining and bars and other activities, but a vast majority of activity has been allowed to continue to go on. I know we see it in Orangeville still in phase 3, so hopefully that can continue. Although again, will depend obviously on the course of the virus. But the other thing that's important is even without government policy, we do see that as cases have risen across jurisdictions, we have seen people more cautious, and especially more cautious in their behavior toward high-touch activities or activities that would require them to come in close contact with other people. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So looking at this on a global scale, we know the virus started in China. It hit the Chinese economy first. The Chinese economy in the first quarter declined by 10%, which is, was at the time extraordinary. But it has since bounced back, and it kind of amazingly bounced back even as the virus spread to the rest of the world. And then in the second quarter, much of the rest of the world, especially advanced economies, but also other emerging markets, really saw a plunge in economic activity. But in China, they were able to control the virus pretty quickly relative to some other places, and were able to reopen their economies. And I think perhaps more importantly, because the government is just able to direct resources wherever it wants, it was able to invest in infrastructure and industrial activity and support growth that way. What we've seen now, that as other economies have opened up and as demand for goods especially has increased, and demand for medical goods, China's factories have been able to benefit from that, and it has seen a surge in exports to advanced economies, including Canada and the United States. And in fact, trade deficits with China have increased, which perhaps I should talk a little bit more about later, given how much of an issue that is been in the United States and with the previous administration. But what we will see, I think, elsewhere is, as we've seen over the last few months, that as long as the virus is around and limits activity in pretty significant segments, especially of the services-based economy, it will be difficult to get to a full recovery. We have emerging markets bouncing back a little bit slower. They've been less restrictive in terms of some of the economic activity, but even there, I think considerable risks until we are more certain of the timing and effectiveness of a vaccine. I do have to say that our forecast has to assume something on that front, and we have assumed that a virus becomes available by the middle of 2021. There are some estimates it could be earlier and some that it could be later. Obviously, earlier would be greater, gives people the confidence to go. If we start to see people being able to get the vaccine early enough, we will see activity resume and a rebound, especially in restaurants and travel and all of the things that are right now operating at 50% capacity or less. But of course, if it comes later or it takes time to really get into the community to the point where herd immunity is achieved, it will take longer just for recovery to happen. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the nuances of the outlook from here on in. So taking it to North America, in fact, I think this from divergence to convergence. In fact, we've sort of, we saw initially in the recovery, Canada's economy not recovery, but downturn during the first half of the year, what you might call the Great Lockdown. The Canadian economy shrunk 25%, which is extraordinary. There's no historical data point that's seen such a rapid decline in activity over a short period of time. That was intentional, so not entirely surprising, but even worse than what we saw in the United States and the extent of lockdowns throughout the Canadian economy, especially in Ontario and in Quebec, where the virus spread early and was quite significant, in British Columbia as well. But we have seen that as the economy reopened through the summer months, the Canadian economy has bounced back even a little bit faster than in the United States. And one of the reasons for that, which I'll get into a little further, is the amount of policy supports that we've seen in Canada. Both countries very, very aggressive and in supporting incomes of both households and businesses, but a little bit different evolution as we've gotten a little bit further from the initial lockdown and moved a little bit further into the future. But overall, we expect to see that after a epic decline in 2020, that with a vaccine and in 2021 we should see economies bounce back. But I think, as I showed in the previous chart, will likely not be really until maybe 2022 until we're at a level of activity that just eclipses where we were prior to the virus. And returning to normal, I think, will be really a multi-year phenomenon, not one that happens in a matter of months or quarters. Okay, so taking off on that idea I talked a little bit about earlier, in the United States, a key to their recovery and it has been the amount of fiscal supports. They had the CARES Act pass Congress. That was a $2.2 trillion package, about 11% of GDP. Canada, by way of comparison, even bigger in terms of the percent of GDP spent on income and business supports. But that happened early. It was very effective in supporting incomes, and you'll see that in some of the other charts, even on both Canada and the United States. But it expired in August. Most importantly, their extended unemployment benefits expired in August, and we have seen since then a drop in income. There has been some talk of another support package, but that has not happened prior to the election, and will probably have to wait until after the November 3rd election to happen, and then will depend on that outcome and who the next president is and what the composition of Congress looks like. But without to be frank, there could be an even bigger fiscal package early next year if we do see a Democratic sweep of Congress and the president. But in the absence of that, we would likely see a bigger decline in economic activity this year, and in fact that may happen because, as I said, it may take until the beginning of next year for this to happen, and a slower recovery. And I can get into that a little bit further, but one way that you see that is in spending activity. And obviously, spending has been influenced by two things. One, obviously, in the initial stage of the lockdown, people couldn't spend really on anything besides groceries, and even then, it was it was difficult to get to some of the necessities. But as economies reopened, we have seen spending recover, and in fact, it's recovered perhaps even faster than would have been anticipated earlier on in the crisis. But there's a little bit of nuance to that story, and a little bit of have to dig into the details to see sort of how spending has rebounded and places where it has been more strained. And you can see that here, showing both Canada and the United States. And one thing we've seen in both countries is that we've really seen a rebound in consumption of goods, and durable goods in particular. People have spent more on, and I have a few slides on this, but have spent more on home improvement, on used vehicles, in fact, and that's in part a direct consequence of people not feeling confident taking public transportation, and having a little bit of savings from not spending on discretionary items. That savings have, some of it at least, have gone into spending on goods, and especially on things like, more expensive durable goods. Autos sales are up close to peaks in Canada and the United States, but where they have not been spending on are things like transportation or transportation services. Flights are still down dramatically, 75% or more, and on going out to bars, gyms, salons. All of those activities are still operating at half capacity, and spending is not really recovered. Even as the total has, it's been a substitution effect away from those services and towards things that perhaps make staying at home all the time a little bit more tolerable. But you also see that there's an important distributional effect and an income. And unfortunately, we don't have great data on this in Canada, but I think we can surmise that it's a similar kind of trend. And certainly the people who have been impacted the worst by the crisis have tended to be lower income, people who are able to work from home, professionals, sort of tend to be higher paying jobs have not been hit really at all and have continued to earn income. Whereas if you do work in services or retail, that's where we've seen, and even obviously small business owners to the same degree have been hit much harder than people of working for large companies able to work from home. So you see that even in the spending data, and what's interesting is that looking on the chart on the right for the U.S., total spending is still down a little bit relative to where it was, but spending of low-income individuals actually is a bit higher, and that is truly the impact of the scope and scale of the income supports that were passed. The CARES Act actually for low-income people provided 200% of the income they had prior to the downturn. So even if you were unemployed, the $600 top-up of unemployment insurance and the $1,200 checks, which went to 95% of households, actually put income above what it would have been in a normal environment, and that allowed spending to continue. The worry, of course, now is we have seen that result in this combination of supported incomes, and income went up 10% in aggregate, even as economic activity contracted 10%, and spending by about the same amount. A big increase in the savings rate, and that's true in Canada as well. But that is starting to be drawn down, and it's fallen over the last few months, and it's fallen more obviously in the United States, where those income supports have now expired. In Canada, we have seen income supports continue, and in fact, the last budget, or sorry, not budget, but the government of Canada, in their throne speech, one of the conditions of it passing was that they maintained the level of additional benefits and the expansion to so-called gig workers and other at the same level as it was prior. So there was they were going to reduce it from 500 to 400, and they kept it where it is. So those income supports have continued to a greater extent, and perhaps we're seeing a little bit of that already in some of the economic data, and would continue to over the next little while. So the other sector of the economy that has really been quite extraordinary in terms of how quickly it's bounced back is the housing market. And just look at the scale on this chart. It's truly extraordinary. We're talking about a growth in home sales over a matter of months that was just tripled the level of home sales relative to the trough that it was in the crisis, to the point that the level of home sales is way above pre-crisis levels. This is perhaps the most indicative of, it's even more than a V-shaped recovery. It's the second leg of the V, or of the arm of the V, is way higher than the first one in terms of the downturn. And that's true everywhere, at least across provinces, and in fact within Ontario, looking at the data, it's true throughout the GTA, including in Orangeville and in Durham and all of the city. And in fact, some of the sales in places just outside of major cities have done even better than within the city themselves, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I think if you would have asked an economist, to predict what was going to happen in the housing market, they would have not come up with a forecast that we were going to see, the hottest housing market we've really had, even hotter than 2016, 2015 in Canada. That probably wouldn't have been the baseline prediction. I mean, typically economic downturns associated with housing downturns, and but I think that speaks obviously to a couple of things very unique about the current situation. One, the scale of the income supports, but two, I mean, mortgage rates fell to historic lows very quickly. But three, there has been a very bifurcated shock. Maybe even you can look at it splitting the impact, and I spoke a little bit about this already, but it's impacted low-wage individuals much more than high-income individuals. And if you are a higher income earner, you've again seen your savings increase, you've seen interest rates fall, and you probably haven't lost your job, or if you have, much of those jobs have been recovered. Some people, of course, have lost their jobs, but it's been disproportionately hit people at the low end wage end of the spectrum, and those are less likely to be home buyers or move up buyers. And what we've seen is what's driven that increased housing demand is obviously people who've kept their jobs and just benefited from the lower interest rate environment, and the need and the desire perhaps for more space. And you really have seen that in the sales by the size of dwelling. Actually, there's even other data that in the price spectrum where the most sales have been single detached, but in the Greater Toronto area, sort of over $1 million, and we've seen those very small condos, the ones that around the $500,000 mark or less, have actually really seen sales fall off. It's the only segment of the market where we've seen a decline. Overall, sales are up for both, but have really seen single detached homes growth expand a lot more than we saw the condo sales. And in fact, there is a sort of, it's a little bit worse than that, to the point where people have started to list their condos, and the increase in listings has been much more dramatic than the rise in sales. And as I said, that's also segmented. So there is at least one segment of the market where we will see and have already seen declines in prices, and that's in that condo market. And in part, that also is due to what's happened in terms of immigration and in terms of schooling, and we have not seen the kind of movement of international students to the country, which has really driven population growth in the GTA over the last little while. That's really been cut, and so students aren't renting condos, and even students who might have come into the city now are virtually doing their school, so they're not renting condos, and that demand has fallen, and you see it really in a bit of a surplus of listings relative to demand. And that's one market where maybe slower to recover, and certainly will depend on a more normal world to come back before we see really any improvement there. The other thing, I mentioned the low interest rates. Low interest rates have supported housing demand, but they've also have supported, I think, other spending, just by the fact that we've seen an increase. The amount that you save if you renegotiate your mortgage is up this year due to the decline in interest rates, and that typically is something that happens in a downturn when interest rates decline. But that savings that can be spent on other things like home gyms, because you can't go to the gym anymore, and things like that we've seen that show up in increased purchases. And just to show that in the data, in fact, one of the neat things that's happened with this crisis is there's been, I don't want to say a silver lining, but there's certainly been a search for any kind of economic data that in real time can give you an indication of what's happening. And you've seen that, I showed that in the first chart, sort of the Google mobility data showing trends and where people are moving, how many, we saw the sharp decline in people going to work. It started to improve, but to go to restaurants, and you see real time daily data on how many people are going to movies and traveling via air. But one thing we also have is some internal data on spending that we've been able to leverage to look at on a month and week by week basis how spending has increased or declined by category. So this is credit and debit spending of TD Bank, and what you see is that we've seen, as you'd expect, people spending more on food. They're spending more on home furnishing, home centers, and hardware. And obviously spending a whole lot less on travel and transportation and recreation and entertainment. But the home furnishings and home improvement really benefits from the housing market, and that's been a second order effect of some of the strength we've seen there. Now that's the sort of the positive side. I mean, on the more dire side, we're still pretty far from normal in terms of where the unemployment rate is relative to where it was. In Ontario, still about 4 percentage points above the pre-recession level. Now it's down a lot. It was around 13.5%. We're down at 10.5% now, but still have a long way to go before we're back to where we were. And you can see that Saskatchewan actually had an incredible month in September, and its unemployment rate dropped. We'll see how long that sustains. But you do see that Nova Scotia, where they've had better success in controlling the virus, they have had less of an economic impact. And again, some of the evolution of this probably will depend as much on the evolution of the health crisis and the pandemic than on anything else. But in Alberta, by the same token, the decline in the oil sands and with the plunge in oil activity has exacerbated what was already sort of an economy that had not been operating at full speed was hit even harder by the pandemic. I think it's interesting and important to note, and something we've commented on, that we have done better than our neighbors to the south in terms of the amount of jobs that have come back and the hours worked. I mean, 75% of what was lost in the initial lockdown period has been recovered in Canada, and in the US they're just over 50%, depending on the metric that you use. The unemployment rate in Canada is similar to the US, but that's in part because in order to be counted as unemployed, you have to be in the labor market and actively looking for work. And a lot of more people in the United States have just dropped out entirely, and some of them because they have to care for family members, especially if they have young children. It's more difficult to remain attached to the labor force if you have to watch your children, and there are no alternatives. In Canada, we have at least some additional supports that have been in place long before the pandemic hit that have allowed people to return to the labor market to a greater degree. So both in terms of the jobs and people's attachment to the labor force, Canada is doing better. And obviously that's something we'll have to continue to watch. And again, will depend on how successful we are in limiting the virus and how much activity is pulled back now with this second wave of viral cases. But good signs initially that policy really does matter in terms of what recovery you have seen as economies have been able to open up. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so another, I think, pardon me, important story and something that we're watching is that the result of those supports, but also a number of other actions in terms of credit forbearance and allowing people, to miss some payments without going into an insolvency or default situation, is that typically you'd expect to see, with a spike in unemployment, people unable to pay their, to keep up with their financial obligations, and that has not happened this time, in part because people have had the income supports that have allowed people to pay down debt. And in fact, credit card debt, we've seen spending increase, but the level of debt, many households have used those supports to pay down their overall level of debt, and that has helped in terms of limiting financial vulnerability, but also these kind of programs. So this is important because as we go forward, if we're eventually, we'll have to see some of the forbearance programs expire, and that we would expect to see that until the unemployment rate has normalized, we would expect to see some increase in insolvencies. And this is true, obviously, this is Canadian data, and this would be true in Canada. But we've fallen a lot, and we'd expect to see that at least normalize, and then will depend, of course, on policy and on supports that are there to bridge people through until we get back to a more normal looking economy and a more normal unemployment rate. So just to kind of touch on some of the financial elements, we have seen, as usually happens in the early parts of the crisis, the Canadian dollar plunge. That happened as oil prices, actually turned negative through late March. But we have seen a bit of a recovery. But Canada's dollar, the loonie, has not done as well as other advanced economies. And proximity to the U.S. and the uncertainty there, perhaps this is versus the U.S. dollar, but also just worries about perhaps some of the longer term impacts, and especially in the commodity space where we still have a pretty low price of commodities and weak global demand. That would typically be something that weighs on the dollar. So even after this crisis is over, we suspect that it'll be quite a number of years before we see interest rates increased. We don't expect until 2023 in both Canada and the United States, and that really is dependent on an economic recovery continuing and gaining strength through next year as a vaccine becomes available. But healing the scars will likely take a bit longer, and that means that we're probably set for a pretty low interest rate environment. Now, we may see at the longer end of the curve some increase in interest rates, especially as a recovery becomes more apparent. But certainly the short end of the curve will be quite anchored at the 0% mark. Okay, so had a question early on from the mayor about the impact of the U.S. election. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. Obviously, important implications for Canada as well. As we've seen over the last 4 years with the last administration, we could be in the crosshairs or not, and there are differences in policy that will influence both the scope of the U.S. recovery, but as well how Canada performs. So the first big issue I already talked about was sort of the size of the fiscal package, and there we have seen a reluctance in the Republican Senate to pass anything like the first round in terms of income supports. But there is an increasing chance that the Democrats at least gain a small majority in the Senate, and they almost certainly will take the House of Representatives. And it looks like Biden will win the presidency, although of course everyone has to caveat that by saying 2016 didn't turn out the way anyone expected it to either. So don't count all your chickens there. But should that happen, obviously, we would expect to see a pretty big expansionary fiscal package, and one that it gives a lot of support to state and local governments, which have been hurt even more than in Canada. I mean, we sometimes don't appreciate that in the United States, state and local governments cannot run operating deficits. They cannot borrow to finance shortfalls. So they have to cut spending, furlough employees when their revenues decline. And that really slowed growth there out of the 2008 recession. And we would expect that would continue if without some support. And we've already seen that. Actually, they laid 280,000 people off at state and local payrolls in September, even as over 1 million jobs were created in aggregate, and most of those were education jobs. So in terms of some of the longer term implications, not being able to adequately fund your education system is potentially could be a negative for your long-term productivity. But of course, some of the other issues are climate change and action on that. We would expect to see, if Trump was to win the presidency, much of the same in terms of deregulation, including environmental deregulations, and a very different policy stance from a Biden administration rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, potentially putting an import tax on carbon imports or things with carbon like oil. That would hit Canada. Some increased uncertainty around pipelines, but probably more broadly on the trade front, one would expect to see a little bit less antagonism toward countries like Canada and the European Union. Biden was part of the Obama administration, obviously, that wanted to sign on to the TPP, which was nixed by President Trump. So, I think we'd still see some trade tensions with China, and even Biden has campaigned on a Buy America infrastructure plan, which would would make sure that it buys local before buying abroad. And Canada was able to get a carve out for that in the stimulus bill that happened after 2008, and sort of just noting the two-way trade that happens between the countries. But it's hard to say what will happen in the new environment there. But happy to take more questions on the U.S. election. We wrote a report on it. It's always fun to talk politics. Of course, especially with Canadians, where we have less invested. If we want to talk Canadian politics, I'll be a little more guarded. But the other thing that we've seen, obviously, an important backdrop in every country, every advanced economy at least, is the huge increase in debt loads. And we have a deficit in Canada that has increased over 10%, 15% or so of GDP. That has all been added to the debt, to the amount of debt. Now, Canada's net debt is lower than the U.S., but as I mentioned, we don't have a lot of debt at the state and local level in the United States. So if you add on provincial government debt, Canada's moves a bit higher, and provincial governments have also been borrowing. And so the goal, I think, going forward is there's several ways of sort of stabilizing your debt to GDP ratio. I mean, first, you do have to bring deficits down at least to a rate that is below the growth of your economy. But if you can do that, you can still have modest deficits and stabilize the GDP ratio as long as your economy is growing. You don't have to see steep surpluses or in order to bring down debt levels. And I think the goal will be to stabilize rather than really put these debt levels on a downward trajectory, as long as market confidence is maintained. And there probably eventually will be a little more risk premium embedded into even sovereign bonds in all advanced economies. But as long as we're sort of in this deeply uncertain world, probably may stay pretty well bid. So something to watch over the longer term, where of course forecasting becomes a lot more difficult. Oops, did that one already. Okay, so that does it for my economic outlook, and I'd love to take questions.
So you guys can ask questions on the YouTube website. If you'd like to type in some questions, I'm happy to read them out for you. I know, James, we do have a question here in respect to investment properties. Do you predict companies will continue to retain this office space with the new and improved remote working from home?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and one I think a lot of people are asking themselves. I mean, I think that is one area of the economy that will bear sort of longer term disruption. The move to working from home had already been happening prior to this recession, but I mean, now the proof of concept of the ability of a lot of people to work effectively from home, I think, does create an environment in which demand for office space, and this will vary obviously by by locality, but demand for office space will be lower for some time than it was. And then, of course, how that works out will depend on the supply dynamics. So places that have built a lot more office space are going to see vacancies the highest, and where there will also be potentially the greatest risk of having to reduce prices to sell those properties. If it goes through vacancies rise, rents decline, and then the value of those properties change. So I would say that we're probably it's going to be a difficult environment there, because even if you think that only 5 to 10% of the office using workforce works from home, or they work from home once a week, even that you can very quickly change office space to lower your footprint, knowing that at least a portion of your workforce is working from home. And it's just been a trend, as I said, that's already was in train and been accelerated by the virus. So something that's probably one of those longer term implications of this crisis.
Excellent. There is another question here for you, James. One moment here. What are the prospects for the tourism and hospitality industries? Where do you see that moving?
Well, again, very much dependent on when we get a vaccine. When there is sort of, we're through this crisis, I don't think there will be any major rebound in those sectors until then. I think eventually there's probably some pent-up demand for travel. I mean, once we're through this, I think people will want to get to travel again, especially if they haven't traveled abroad or done any major international travel, been on an airplane in over a year. If we're truly past this, I think that could start to rebound. I mean, one thing we have seen though in the travel industry is that people are traveling closer to home, and certainly, you saw in Canada, in Ontario, that through the summer months there was a whole lot of demand for cottages and places where people could just get out of the city and get away. They could work there even if they had to for 2 months. So there are segments perhaps more local that have benefited and are doing better, just due to the substitution away from bigger trips and just the desire for people to want to get out of their homes. But the industry, I think, in aggregate, obviously, will not get back to normal until we're through the health crisis. Excellent.
This is another question here. Can you comment on lumber costs and when there will be a lowering of these costs?
That's a good question, and I my colleague is our commodity expert, and he's. I know that prices are very high right now, and I think in part that reflects some of the housing story that I talked about, that we've really seen an increased demand for single detached homes, and construction in Canada has been solid, and it's rebounded quickly in the United States as well. Of course, there's also the tariffs and things in the U.S. side, but I mean, I would think that prices will stay high as long as that demand story is there. But depending on sort of how supply can respond, we may see a little bit of an alleviation there. But I would point you to if you want to, I can get more information, a better, more fulsome answer to that question if maybe they want to send me an email, or because I can. We do have economists and analysts who look into that a lot more carefully than I do.
Fantastic. Next question here. What would the economic impact be if there are any delays in the vaccination rollout?
I mean, I think it's pretty intuitive that we will two things. One, there are those parts of the economy that will continue to have to operate at half capacity. Some improvement may happen just as we figure out new ways of operating safely while the virus is still in our midst, and we have seen that to some extent already. But I think we will continue to see anything that requires people to agglomerate in close proximity to be impaired and have to operate at very limited capacity, which will limit the pace of recovery. So ultimately, until we get a vaccine, growth will be slower, and we won't sort of make up for where we were. I mean, you know, you will again see changes and substitutions within there on what people spend on and what businesses grow. Obviously, you know, tech and other things that can substitute for coming together in person will benefit. But I think overall, the size of those industries are so large that until we can get a vaccine, we will continue to see an economy that's not quite operating at full capacity.
Sure. These are some interesting questions here. Will the decrease to resolve our debt be mostly with increase in taxes?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the first thing that will have to happen is that temporary programs will have to be unwound. And the majority of the increase in the deficit that we've seen has been those temporary programs. So expanded CRB, the business supports, and as those are unwound, the deficit will naturally come back down. So that doesn't necessarily require an increase in taxes to pay for. I mean, as you saw on that debt chart, you have a push up in the level of debt relative to GDP, but you could stabilize it, mind you, at a higher level. Now, the other question will be what happens to interest rates, and if interest rates stay relatively low, servicing that debt, even at a higher level of debt, is still less. I mean, in fact, that's happened right now, that the debt servicing costs of even at higher levels of debt have fallen relative to where they were prior to the crisis. But if interest rates start to rise, and you still have a deficit, I mean, then there becomes some concern of how do you put that on a stable path. And I mean, the worst case scenario, as I said, is that you have interest rates rise above the difference between, so that your growth rate of the economy is below the level of cost of servicing the debt, and then you do have to bring you have to get into surplus position, or your debt to GDP ratio goes up. And in that case, I mean, there are several strategies. There could be both some spending cuts, but I would suggest that you know, tax increases eventually will probably be part of the solution. Yeah.
Perfect. We do have one more question here, James. What do you see happening in the education sector with more people moving to online learning and the government doesn't seem to adequately handle the demand?
Well, it's been an incredible shock there, and I mean, a bit speculative on my part, but I would suspect that the move to online learning, the proof of concept that it can be done, I think we will eventually see, you know, again, once we get past the virus, we will see people moving back to traditional post-secondary education, and obviously just even all the way up through grade 1 to grade 12. It's still, I think, more effective that way, but there probably will be some need for online education to get the support it needs, and people may want to choose that option. But yeah, I mean, I think if schools are to operate safely, you know, we have to invest the resources in doing that. And you know, even after we get past this crisis, I think we know that it's a possibility that it could happen again. And I hope that the lesson learned is we'd really like to keep schools open the next time this happens, especially earlier grades. I mean, it will depend on what kind of virus. Of course, you can't account for all circumstances, but making sure that could happen in a safe way, I think could go a long way. One, to actually mitigating the size of the economic shock, because both in terms of education and the fact that, you know, parents were suddenly left, you know, if they had a job that they couldn't work from home, they couldn't work. So avoiding that, I think, would be a good mitigating strategy. Absolutely.
I don't think there's any other questions at this time, James. So I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation today. It was very informative and thought-provoking, and we're always pleased to have you join us. So I really thank you for joining us online today and bringing your expertise to our Economic Outlook event. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd now like to call upon Joe Andrews, Councillor with the Town of Orangeville and Chair of the Town's Business and Economic Development Advisory Committee. He will now introduce our panel of business owners.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Charlene, and thank you, James, too, for your economic outlook. And I think it was, as all of us who are viewing on YouTube this morning, impactful. It has provided us with real understanding at this point, the impact of COVID. And we're crossing our fingers that a vaccine will be found and rolled out to the public as soon as possible. But we're certainly looking forward to better days ahead. But I have to admit that the great days that we've been dealing with has been really felt amongst our community. And there are so many ways of describing the resiliency and the active view towards making sure that people are being serviced in our community has really been a part of the discussion, I know, with BDAC and the members. So I'd like to again welcome you to the second portion of today's Economic Outlook Breakfast Summit. And I'm pleased to be here today as the chair of BDAC, but more importantly, to introduce our panelists that we have. I know that many of you have already asked some questions of our keynote speaker, James, but don't exhaust those questions because we do have some great panelists, and I know that once they've had an opportunity to present their view and how they've been able to weather the storm through COVID, I'm hoping that many of you will stick around and ask some questions. So what we want to do is introduce our local business owners. And again, we want to thank our panelists for speaking today and sharing their experiences of resiliency and recovery. These panelists, like many of our community entrepreneurs, have had to respond to incredible challenges over the past year with innovation, enthusiasm, and a can-do attitude. They've worked to sustain their ventures, pivot their operations, and grow. I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I will provide a short bio on each one of them before we get into our first panelist. Our panelists include Mark Jameson, Shelley Wishart, Milena Pereira, and Derek Train. Mark Jameson is the owner of Mono Arts and Graphics Printing and Quality Clean Solutions. Mark is a well-respected and proven community leader, having owned and operated multiple mid-sized businesses, as well as having run the Canadian operations for a billion-dollar global company. Mark has over 15 years of sales and marketing senior management experience in the IT sector and 10 years experience in the hospitality arena. Mark is experienced in all facets of business operation and also readily shares his expertise as a mentor to up-and-coming entrepreneurs, providing business advice and coaching. Recently completed a stint with the Town of Orangeville overseeing the entrepreneurship training program, Starter Company Plus. Mark is a community-minded businessman volunteering his time with the Dufferin Board of Trades Ambassador Committee. Mark owns and operates, as I mentioned, Mono Arts and Graphics Printing, and this year also founded a second company, Quality Clean Solutions, in response to the explosive demand for hand sanitizer and cleaning products. And welcome, Mark. We'll be with you in just a moment. Our next panelist is Shelley Wishart, owner of Go Yoga. Yoga is Shelley Wishart's passion. She believes yoga and meditation are good for the soul and feels fortunate to share her knowledge with the community of Orangeville. The owner of Go Yoga, a popular studio in the heart of downtown Orangeville, Shelley has worked very hard to create a welcoming and inspiring space where members can focus on their health and feeling their best. Go Yoga offers a wide range of classes and events, including online instruction and support. Shelley is a seasoned entrepreneur and up until 1 year ago was the CEO of a successful multi-million-dollar beauty business. Go Yoga has given Shelley the opportunity to continue to put her business experience and creative talents to good use as she readily shares her expertise by mentoring up-and-coming entrepreneurs. When faced with the restraints created by the pandemic, she too had to find a new and innovative way and ways to conduct business. Welcome, Shelley. We'll also have you join our panel in just a moment. And our third panelists, husband and wife, in this case, Milena Pereira and Derek Train, owners of Temple Nutrition. Derek and Milena both worked in the corporate and government sectors for several years before launching Temple Nutrition in 2018. This food pickup and delivery service located at Highway 10 between Orangeville and Caledon Village provides quality, ready-to-eat meats using fresh local produce and nutritious ingredients. The business services Orangeville, Erin, Shelburne, Grand Valley, and Caledon. When the pandemic hit, Derek and Milena provided and pivoted their business model to focus on high-end grocery orders to pick up or delivery, and have been busy filling orders for customers who want their fridges filled with fresh produce, meats, essentials, and specialty local items. Company proudly supports Canadian farmers and small business owners in our community, and the company name speaks to the owner's ideal that people treat their bodies as a temple when it comes to eating. So again, welcome to our panelists, and for those of you that are still with us today, I'm hoping that you will have an opportunity to listen to their views on the COVID recovery, but more importantly, how they've been able to persevere, and hold your questions to a little bit later on. So we're going to start with Mark. Mark, we would like to welcome you as our first panelist, and we look forward to your discussion.
Thank you very much, Joe. I hope everybody can hear me. Unfortunately, we've had some technical issues this morning getting me onto the video conferencing. So we've got somebody here going to present my PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully, we can follow along that way. So just as an introduction here, as human beings, we are programmed to resist change. Change is a very scary proposition. And unfortunately, we've all been forced to change over the course of this pandemic. So as the old adage says, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Next slide, please. So looking at my existing business, Mono Arts and Graphics Printing Company, the company's been around in Orangeville since 1974, and the business really is dependent upon the small business, and primarily throughout Dufferin County. When the COVID hit and businesses started shutting down, there was a lockdown, and a lot of our customers obviously were not able to continue their marketing efforts. A lot of them shut down, so their general usage of printed products and printed materials declined dramatically. So we made a very difficult decision back at the end of March to lay off some staff and to try and keep the business afloat, hopefully through the end of the pandemic. So the question then became, how do you pay the bills? The rent, unfortunately, was still coming due, still had to be paid. The hydro bills, the equipment leases, all of those expenses didn't stop, even though the business stopped. So I kind of looked at all the different PPE opportunities and thought, which one is the most feasible for us to get into, considering barriers of entry, capital cost, assortments, everything else. And hand sanitizer became the area that we were going to focus on next. Next slide, please. So I've got an existing client in our print business here that manufactures pool chemicals. So I engaged with him and asked him if he would be willing to support us as a contract manufacturer in making hand sanitizers. Looking at his relationship he's got with all the major chemical distribution companies across Canada and throughout North America, we were able to obviously get access to most of the products required in order to build a hand sanitizer product. They also, through their 50 years in business, have a great relationship, rapport, and were able to get allocation of some difficult to find products. The second point there, probably the most important aspect, is that they had a warehouse full of bottles, containers, pumps, lids, those sort of things, which really were the major hurdle in launching a hand sanitizer business. A lot of the distillers, brewers, etc., who pivoted into the hand sanitizer were utilizing alcohol bottles because that was the packaging they had available to them. Health Canada has recently eliminated that as an option because they didn't want people thinking they're alcohol and start drinking hand sanitizer. It's certainly not healthy for you. They've got a very long and lengthy ability to mix various chemicals. They've got a test lab. They've got chemists on site. So to help us build and formulate a proper product, they were the ideal partner. And certainly the equipment they have in-house enabled us to mix and bottle the product quickly and efficiently. Looking at, that was the partner side, and from my side, we had a facility here that was virtually idle and sitting here, again, rent being due and everything else. We've got computers, we've got software, we've got the QuickBooks, things that you need to run an ongoing business. The current phone systems, we simply added an additional phone line, and we had the ability to run a company, answer phones, and do all the things we needed to do. Next slide, please. So the first thing we did was had to come up with a company name, and it's harder than you think, because not only do you need a domain name and a website, but social media is such a prominent area today in small business. You look at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these are all global properties. So to come up with a brand and a name that has those properties available was somewhat challenging. We did decide on the name Quality Clean Solutions, and Solutions, again, was something that we could develop into a longer-term brand and multi-product company. So we incorporated that company on April 23rd. All the while this was going on, of course, we were working with our contract manufacturer to develop a product. Now, the World Health Organization has published a formula that for hand sanitizers. It's basically 4 simple ingredients that are available around the world. However, it's like dipping your hand in a bottle of Javex or turpentine. It just isn't very pleasant. It works, it kills the virus, it does its job, but it just doesn't feel great. Nothing you want to have on your hands longer term and on a continuing basis. So once we had our formulation devised, we applied to Health Canada. Now, for hand sanitizer, you need both a site license to product, produce, and bottle, and a product license, of course, for the actual product ingredients. So we applied for those licenses. In the meantime, we engaged with a local website developer who was excellent, and on May the 12th, we launched our website. Next slide, please. We received our site license approval from Health Canada on May the 12th. We got our product license May the 15th, and because we'd already developed and had a warehouse full of product here, we actually began shipping on May the 18th. Now, in my estimation, hand sanitizer is something that's going to be with us long after the pandemic. I think we're now all becoming accustomed to having hand sanitizer at our disposal wherever we are, and I think that will continue for the rest of our lives. The question then began, how do we build a brand? And as it turned out, it wasn't about building a brand, it was simply about filling the demand in the marketplace. We were simply filling orders. As of July the 9th, 3,557 product licenses were issued by Health Canada. Now, if you think about the pandemic really hitting us the end of March, to have that many licenses done as of July, the beginning of July, is pretty incredible. So I was not the only person who was thinking about a hand sanitizer as an ongoing business. Next slide, please. Just taking a little bit of an in-depth look at hand sanitizers. Ethanol is the primary ingredient, and there are different grades of ethanol based upon the impurities. So the worst level of ethanol is industrial grade. And this is what's used in a lot of chemicals and industrial grade solutions. This is not something that's approved for use in hand sanitizers, although many people, due to the global shortages, have tried to use this into their products. Health Canada has done an incredible job of weeding out these people and shutting down operations that use this type of industrial grade ethanol. The second level is a technical grade ethanol. This one here is approved for use under a temporary measure, emergency measure by Health Canada. So the one thing about technical grade is it must have the following warnings on the label. Adults only, do not inhale, do not use on broken or damaged skin, not recommended for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding. So those are some pretty dire warnings. And unfortunately, again, because of the pandemic and everybody needing hand sanitizers, the government has agreed to allow this type of ethanol to be used in the products. The best and highest grade ethanol is food grade or USP ethanol. That is what we are using in the majority of our products. And we do have ample access to this product. Because it's a lot more expensive than technical grade, we've also been approved for Health Canada to utilize technical grade in our formula simply to fulfill some large government tenders and things where price is more important than the quality of product. Next slide, please. So looking at our current products, we've got a full range of sizes. Our current formula is a liquid solution. It's 80% ethanol. Health Canada recommends between 60 and 80% ethanol for an approved hand sanitizer. So we have a 60 milliliter bottle, which is a great little purse size, fits in your pocket, kids put it in your lunchbox, just anywhere you want to go and travel, it's very convenient. We have a 240 ml bottle in both a pump and a flip cap solution. Works great on anybody's desk, works in your car when you pump gas, you come out from the grocery store, you want to put some sanitizer in your hands, that's a great solution. We have a 500 ml, a 1 liter jug, which is great for reception desks and those things. We've got a 4 liter jug, which is utilized primarily through the commercial industrial applications. It's in the warehouses, that sort of thing, where people use a lot of hand sanitizer. It needs to be conveniently accessed. Again, trying to build a brand. We've got future products in the pipeline. We've got a hard surface cleaner, and that's used for things like doorknobs, countertops, the keypad of your computers, a photocopier keypad, which is used by multiple people, etc. We have a soft surface cleaner, which is really upholsteries and those sort of things. Great for car dealerships when they do a cleaning of your car and need to sanitize after a service done. We've created accessories, so mounts to mount these things so these big bottles aren't sitting around on someone's desk or somewhere obtrusive in the way. And we've got some hand-free dispensers that we are also producing. Next slide, please. So as a takeaway from what I've learned from this experience, run, don't walk. And that's really a message not only for the PPE suppliers, but also for any entrepreneur. Speed is the most important metric of any business. The important thing is you get out there, start the company, start actively operating, start selling, start finding clients. You can always fine-tune the business later. You can always fine-tune the products, the packaging, your website, everything else later, but you got to be at the market. And in this case in particular, the speed was the most important thing that has led to our success. Find great partners. The one thing that, we certainly could not do this job without our partner, manufacturing partner. So again, the message there really is to leverage the relationships for mutual benefit. I can tell you that the manufacturer is making a ton of money off me. This is not something they're doing as a charity. So we are paying top dollar for the product. So they are benefiting, and certainly we are benefiting. And I think and hoping that we are benefiting the community at large by providing a product that is a wonderful product and is helping to defeat this COVID-19 pandemic. And the last message there is just cost containment. One of the reasons this whole hand sanitizer thing came up is that my primary business had a problem. And we had to find a way to contain the costs and try and offset some of those losses. So, the message there really is utilize all your available resources you have at your fingertips. Don't be afraid to leverage, your network of people, contacts. Everybody is willing to help if you just ask the question. And of course, cash is king. So one of the things we've done is we've asked for most of our customers pay us up front before the product ships, and yet we have a 30-day terms with our supplier. So we were able to manage our cash flow that way. And certainly our partner, by buying these totes of large chemicals, they're taking on that fiscal burden ahead of time, and we only have to pay and release some cash is when we buy product and manufacture products. So that's really the message overall. Speed to market, find great partners, and control your costs. Next slide. So that's really what my message is today. Quality Clean Solutions is a new company. We're Orangeville based, and we're happy to support the community and hopefully continue to drive the business and help solve the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much for that insightful journey, and the journey does continue, but how you've been able to run and respond with the resources that you have. I know that we will have some questions that will be posed by some of those that are viewing this summit this morning. Our next presenter and panelist I'd like to introduce is Shelley Wishart. Shelley has a presentation. So Shelley, welcome to the panel this morning.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's really an honor to be able to share with you a little bit about Go Yoga, and I'm going to see if I can pull up. I prepared a presentation just, oh, it says bad network quality. Hopefully you can hear me. I presented something just to kind of walk you through what we did during COVID. I'm just going to get right into it. First of all, we're in an independent yoga studio. We've been around in Orangeville now for 5 years, and we started out in a much smaller space on First Street, and now we're on in a beautiful building on Broadway, which we thoroughly renovated, and I mean, it really is such a treasure. So when COVID hit, and we weren't able to welcome our members into our studio, it kind of threw us for a bit of a loop. So our first concern was really delivering our product to our customers, which is yoga. So the first thing that we did, being sort of really not that great in technology, we went first of all to Facebook, which kind of did the trick. It delivered yoga classes free, not just to our members, but to the entire community of Orangeville. So that kind of kept us sort of in relevant, and also we were able to deliver what all of us so badly needed, our daily ritual of healthy practices. So we did that, and then we realized that we we needed to start or have a revenue stream. We have our business operates on memberships, and at the very beginning, a lot of people didn't know how long the situation was going to be carrying on. So many of our members generously kept their memberships going. We didn't touch our membership rates. We just continued to deliver in any way that we could. So we moved to Zoom so that it was a little bit more exclusive. We continued with the Facebook for the rest of the community in a more limited way, but had our members sign on through Zoom so that you had to be invited to participate in a class. And it seems like such a small thing, but to get yoga teachers to actually do a class on Zoom, it's so outside of most people's comfort zone, and in particular ours. It was the technology of figuring out the music and everything else was crazy, but we did it, and we converted our studio into kind of like a TV studio with much scrubbing and washing in between as our teachers came and went. So here's a little bit just about our memberships. We decided not to change our membership costs. We were under a lot of pressure, and we thought about it a lot, but we originally thought, well, maybe we should reduce our membership rates, but we also didn't, we were worried about that triggering out, well, you know, they're not delivering the best and how much is enough. So our focus was always delivering the maximum amount that we could and keep our membership costs the same. In the end, we ended up losing some of our members, or people putting their memberships on hold. And we dipped as low as about 30% of our original membership. But it didn't happen all at once. People stuck with us, and we've had some people join us, which I'll explain a little bit later here. The other thing that we did, because we have the storefront, we're on Broadway, we have a little boutique in the front of our yoga studio, and there were a number of businesses that closed their doors due to COVID, but also due to just natural retirement. So we wanted to have a reason for people to come into our studio and our store and buy things once everything was back up and running. So while we were closed, though, we had our sewer. We have a woman who makes some things for our boutique. She converted her whole manufacturing for us to making, she was a local lady, making masks. And it was shocking. Originally, I said, oh, maybe you could just make us a dozen masks. And we sold thousands of masks, which many of them we delivered to people's doorsteps. And we still have masks in the store, and they're $9.95 each or 3 for $25, and we continue to sell them. And they're made out of just sort of an assortment of 100% cotton fabric. We pumped up our online shopping. So we did some Instagram, kind of like trunk shows, we called them, where we showed the world everything that we had in our store. And again, when COVID hit, I thought, oh my gosh, we have all these things coming for spring and there's no way we're going to sell any of it. But we were shocked. People were at home. They needed entertainment, and our shelves were almost stripped bare after the first one that we did. Which made me think, why didn't we do this before? You know, we ended up throughout the course of all of this. I was just comparing our numbers from September 2019 to September 2020. And although our memberships are down, our yoga revenue is way down, our retail revenue is double what it was. And so we've put more effort into what can people buy? How can we deliver to them, either us hand delivering or encouraging people to come into the store with social distancing, and how do we advertise what we have? So we've really utilized social media and expanded in that area a lot. So that's a picture of our Go Yoga bus, which when the weather was good, we used that for our deliveries. It's now resting for the winter, so no more Go Yoga bus for a while. As soon as we could, we took our yoga outside, and we had on the 9 generously let us use his space. And so we painted these giant chalk circles on the lawn so that we could socially distance. And that was our first group classes, not Zoom, but in person. And people were so moved by that experience. Like we were just so happy to actually see real people. And here you can see some of those people. And then ultimately we moved to Island Lake, which has been our partner for outdoor yoga in the summers now for the past 3 years. They have a beautiful pavilion, which probably most of you have seen. And we're able to, with social distancing, we were able to have 24 people at a time. And that has been really popular. And in fact, our last Yoga on the Lake class took place on Saturday. The weather was good, and so now we're kind of closed for the season. We kept extending it because it's so nice to have a large gathering like that, and people really enjoy it, but the weather's not cooperating anymore. And then when we hit phase 3, when we were back in the studio, we've had to invest a little bit more in technology. So we have 3 studio spaces, and our largest studio space normally holds about 25 people. But with COVID, we were able to fit 10 people in, plus the teacher. So, which is okay, except that now our classes have long waiting lists. So we're expanding to use our main floor studio, which has 9 spaces. So we'll have the capacity for 19 spaces. And we're doing this by live streaming from our upstairs studio to our downstairs studio. So that we only have to pay for 1 teacher to do both of those classes. And then we'll have some of our student teachers volunteer to just be available in the main floor studio. Maybe that's too much detail, but all of this to say that our heads are exploding with technology. We have 3 studio spaces, and the other thing that we did is we held some events. We realized that what the community was really craving was something to go to, something to look forward to. So we partnered with Cambium Farms, and they are an event space. It's a magnificent barn that's been renovated, and they hold weddings there. It's so beautiful. And throughout the summer, they were having food trucks come, different food truck every night of the weekend. But they have this indoor space that's like a giant magical cave, and it's all temperature controlled. And so we rented it from them. We thought we'd try it once. It holds 35 people with social distancing. And we taped down where the mats would go. And we charged $20 a person, and we instantly sold out the first one. So we've been doing one every month since then. We've had to put it on hold because they're in Peel region, and they're back to stage 2 again. But our intention is to go forward with that because like once they're up and running again, because it really has been a special event for all of us. And it's access to something in our community that unless we were invited to a wedding or something that was there, we wouldn't actually get to see. So that's been really great. And it's really only like 15 minutes from Orangeville. And that's it. So really my message, and I guess to sum it all up, one of the things I thought about that made a difference in our performance during all of this is that we had a team. There was a group of us. So it wasn't just me operating on my own. I think I would have probably thrown in the towel, especially with the technology, but there was a lot of problem solving, a lot of keeping each other's spirits up, a lot of focus on our intention, which was to continue to deliver yoga to the community of Orangeville. So here it is: teamwork, community, our mindset. We had to we're kind of proud of ourselves every time we figure out how to fix our sound or connect to some new Bluetooth device. We've been able to grow a lot in terms of our learning, and we're optimistic. We've seen that people are coming back to the studio. People are reinstating their memberships, the ones that put them on hold. We now have an online portal studio, so people can join remotely. So we've even picked up people that are in the US, like people that aren't even living in Orangeville, that have become virtual studio members. And we're optimistic and we'll be even stronger once we're past all of the COVID restrictions. So that's it. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, for your insightful view to maintaining your business connection to our community and supporting, of course, your client base. We'll be posing some questions to you very soon, but I'd like to introduce our next panelists, and they are ready to go. Melina Pereira, as well as Derek Train, owners of Temple Nutrition. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us today. So when we started hearing news about COVID-19 spreading overseas, where shutdowns and lockdowns were happening countrywide, we were already preparing to drastically change our business. We knew that the needs of people were going to change. Our busy clients were not going to be so busy anymore. Their needs were going to change, especially when the toilet paper was flying off the shelves. We were preparing to be locked down. We just didn't know to what extent. Our clients went from busy families that didn't have enough time to cook to at home with the kids, homeschooling, making bread. Family dynamics were changing every day as COVID came closer, but the biggest message was stay home. There are many character traits that you must have to be an entrepreneur, but I want to talk to you about 3 traits that we pulled from when we needed to make drastic decisions in our business, when the future of our business was at jeopardy and there was a risk of losing it all. Adaptability, resilience, and innovation are the 3 very important characteristics. Adaptability. The nature of business is ever-changing. Entrepreneurship is an iterative process. New challenges and opportunities present themselves at every turn. It's nearly impossible to be prepared for every scenario. Entrepreneurs need to evaluate situations and adapt quickly so their business can keep moving forward when unexpected changes occur. How did we adapt? Derek and I were talking about what we needed to change in our business to adjust to this new environment. Completely dissolve everything we had just spent 2 years building, a successful meal preparation and delivery business. We changed our entire business model that night. You may or may not believe in the power of the universe, but in that moment, when we were making the biggest decision of our business and in our life, the lights flickered on and off and we both said, okay. So for us, an additional confirmation that this was the right path. In order to adapt in the ever-changing economic environment, you also need to be resilient. This means having the confidence to make challenging decisions and seeing them through. If the outcome turns out to be less than favorable, the decision to take corrective action is just as important. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of, in this case, COVID, a threat to our business and livelihood. We have a 4-year-old son, his name is Aiden. Everything we do is to give him the best life possible. Transforming our business is also a balance of risk tolerance and resilience. We are risk takers. There's no doubt about that. We have been from the beginning. We didn't qualify for any government support, income support, while many businesses did. We didn't, and built a new business with our own resources. Resilience is taking the risk, calculated to some extent, and then acting on it. Your decision cannot sway after you commit to a new direction. Make a plan. Innovation. Many ascribe to the idea that innovation goes hand in hand with entrepreneurship. This is often true. Some of the most successful startups have taken existing products or services and drastically improved them to meet the changing needs of the market. It's also the idea of what you can do with what you already have. At Temple, what has set us apart is our quality and commitment to our clients. In our meal prep days, we were already purchasing premium produce. What sets us apart from regular grocery store is our quality, our customer service, and our direct buying relationships with local farmers. We support local Canadian farmers and have unlimited access to any local produce. We created the concept of a farmer's e-market, where our clients can buy fresh local produce, farmers market quality, without going to the physical farmers market and having the confidence to buy without looking and touching the food. We quickly grew to offering produce, then artisanal meats, to essentials, and now to local specialty products. We transformed our website, took to social media to showcase our quality, and reinforce our dedication to clients and people of our community that we are here and ready to serve them no matter the environment. We are a complete e-commerce business and use social media as a major tool to drive business and sales. In addition to these three characteristics that are crucial to thriving in this environment is ensuring that you take care of yourself. This is the most important thing you can do for yourself, is ensuring your health and nutrition are on point.
All right. Well, I would like to share with each of you some of the practices that I've learned in life that better the individual self. Ways that you can gain more control over your body and mind so that you can operate more confidently in times of stress. Let me start off by reassuring you that you don't always have to know how, you just have to hold on. Your thoughts, the way you talk to yourself, the way you think about the things you're doing are all very powerful in your development of your outcome. If you think you will fail, then you will. If you are already thinking if a second lockdown is imposed, you won't survive, then you won't. It is vital to have positive vision to survive. You don't always have to know how, you just have to hold on. The path will present itself as long as you keep going. So number one, obviously, is don't give up on yourself. Nutritionally speaking, it is absolutely apparent to me that the human body and what we put in it are intrinsically linked. A very big part of you is made up of what and how you eat. What else could you possibly grow from? How much you do in a day is largely based on how much energy you have to do it. The more energy you have, the more you can get done. The better you manage your nutrition, the more energy you can ensure you have. With the long days and short weeks of entrepreneurship, energy management can be the deciding factor of a for-lease sign. Consider changing what you eat to greatly reducing your refined sugar and carbohydrate intake for the next 30 days. Sugar may as well be poison. Even limit your fruit. Try obtaining your carbohydrates almost entirely from leafy vegetables. High healthy fats are optimal for your entire body. That's the whole evolutionary reason why we store fat on our bodies. For when we didn't have access to food, we could keep hunting optimally by eating the superior fuel source of fat off our bodies during our fasted states to keep us going. Which brings me to my next topic of implementing a 16 hours minimum of fasting into your daily eating routines. Do this every day for 1 week and then don't eat for a Monday for 36 hours. I recommend everyone do this at least once in their lifetime. I know at first this may sound daunting. Inside of 30 hours can indeed be a mental and physical test for the first time, sure. But in the last 6 hours, however, you'll discover a side within yourselves that many of you may not realize you even have. You'll awaken spiritual pathways within your incredible body that begin to mobilize everything differently than it is now, and you completely change. An abundance of incredible scientific things start to happen, but to save on time, your brain and body basically start to evolve and survive. You become a little bit smarter, you become a little bit stronger, and a little bit faster. You make and use energy differently within yourself. You become more creative. You go farther in mental hurdles. You fear less. You doubt yourself less. You get sick less. You regenerate and clean every trillions of cells within your being and become a better human being. Fasting throughout time has made us better hunters, philosophers, and more spiritually awakened. Apply these biohack upgrades to your modern day and you can become a better entrepreneur. Finally, I want to remind each of you that you can accomplish anything. Obviously, from the other speakers, it's apparent that moving to a social media or online presence is the way of the future. But I want to remind you that you didn't arrive here on this planet like a flock of birds on a tree, that we grew out of it. Don't get too lost in the seriousness of all of this. Indeed, take it seriously, but self-enlightenment is the key to getting through anything. With every closed door, you can always find a window as long as you keep looking. And that's it.
I love that.
Well, thank you very much, Derek and Melina. Your wisdom and view to responding to not only your entrepreneurship, but also more importantly, how you've been able to service the community in such a robust way. You know, words that have come part of the three presenters today include how you've been able to take risks, how you've been able to adapt, perseverance, resiliency, and optimism. That's one takeaway that I found from each one of our presenters. Charlene, I know that we have some questions that have been posed on the YouTube Live, so I'll let you pose those questions to our panelists right now.
Sure. So the first question here is for Shelley. Shelley, based on your success with retail sales, do you anticipate online product sales to represent a greater portion of your revenue? And do you have any projections on how revenue sources will change for your business?
You are muted, Shelley.
Shelley?
Well, maybe what we'll do in this case, Charlene, because Shelley is not with us, maybe that question can be posed to our other panelists, you know, with maybe some tweaking. So maybe Mark can provide maybe some insight to his business, as well as Melina, as well as Derek too, as well.
Yeah, I can go first, Joe. Yeah, I think that the online is certainly a way that more and more people are shopping. We're finding through the lockdown periods, people like Amazon have certainly flourished. Our business thus far has been primarily servicing large accounts through a distributor, through some government contracts, etc. So a lot of that's been done sort of person to person or through the phone, etc. But we do have a very robust e-commerce website. And we do expect, as we build the brand a little more established and have a little more social media presence, that we will see more and more of our business moving towards the e-commerce platform. We are, again, trying to promote a lot of local shopping, and we have a facility here that we are welcoming people to come and pick up their orders, but by all means, we have the capacity to ship and deliver locally as well. So e-commerce is certainly a great way to shop, an easy way for everybody to shop. And in a product like ours, where it's somewhat impersonal, I mean, we all know what a hand sanitizer does, what it looks like, and what it should feel like. So I think that we're going to see more and more of the e-commerce direction for that for sure.
Okay, I do see Shelley is back, so look forward to your response to that question. You'll have to unmute, Shelley. There you go.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't hear the question because it somehow got thrown out of the meeting. I had a technology issue.
So Charlene, can you pose that question to Shelley then?
Absolutely. Shelley, based on your success with retail sales, do you anticipate online product sales to represent a greater portion of your revenue? And do you have any projections on how revenue sources will change for your business?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We did also set up, we linked to the BIA's Shopify site during all of this, and we do have online sales through our website, but it's never really, we've never put much attention into it. So it's one of our goals going forward is to not put all of our products, but we have some things that are special. Things that you can only find at Go Yoga, like our bolsters and our rompers and that sort of thing. So, and we now have our own little collection of clothing. So those things are going to be on our newer online shopping site. And I think the key for all of that is, again, like how we promote it, like how we're able to reach our current market and beyond. So yeah, we're working on that. And I don't know what the numbers would be at this point, but it's one of our priorities going forward.
Fantastic. I do have a question, and I think it might be to all of you. Have any of you accessed any of the various grants available for PPE and social media? No.
The social media one, they have a digital is that what you're talking about? The digital Main Street one that's out there? It's for, yeah, so there is this thing called Digital Main Street, and they had it last year as well, and it's a $2,500 grant but you have to put together your plan on what you plan to spend it on. So it's all for anything having to do with digital, and so it's I think especially relevant this year. It started last year, so we've applied for that and haven't heard back yet. And then there was one that the tourism board has put out that's a PPE grant, and I think it's like a $2,000 grant, and we haven't applied for that yet, but we were thinking about it.
Okay, posing that same question to Melinda and also Derek, because they referenced that in their presentation, the utilization of social media.
Yeah, so we did not apply for any government grants to propel our business through this.
But we can explore.
Yeah, the digital we didn't explore that one, but that's
yeah,
something to consider.
Digital Main Street. I don't know if there's a jurisdiction that you have to be in, but it's worth looking into. I mean, we used it last year. You can easily spend $2,500, even if it's just on photography for your products or software, anything like that.
Great.
Yeah, the Digital Main Street grant is available only to BIA associated businesses. But so we are not eligible for the actual grant, but I have utilized a lot of their resources. They've got a tremendous online resources. They host a number of webinars and really great informative sessions that I have been a part of. So I find they're very, very helpful, although I am not eligible for the grant per se.
I'm wondering if we have any parting comments that our three panelists would like to share, because I am aware of our time, and of course those that are part of the YouTube connection today. Charlene, any other comments that you'd like to make as well?
No, I would like to thank our panelists for coming out today and joining us. There are no other questions at this time, Joe. So if we are okay, we can move on.
Yes,
unless,
hand it back to you. And,
all righty.
And thank you to everyone
I
who's been part of this.
Thank you.
So I know we have on the phone, I'd like to welcome Franca Pomponio from FedDev Ontario to say a few words.
And she will be on mute, so she will just have to hit *6 on her phone to unmute herself.
Franca?
And again, that's *6 on your phone to unmute yourself.
Hello?
We hear you there, Franca.
Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry about that, everyone. And I'll thank Charlene and the others who were able to. It was my error. I was supposed to give welcoming remarks, but I will not take up a lot of time because I know that we're over already. But instead of welcoming, I'll just say that I was extremely happy to be invited to be part of the session today. How interesting was all of that information? That was a great panel discussion and a great presentation and lots of really good information from TD that I'll be taking back to the office and to my colleagues. And really, I had some notes about, how important small businesses are and some stats that also we heard earlier this morning. So I won't go over that, but I did want to recognize and just say on behalf of FedDev Ontario, thank you so much and belated happy Small Business Week and Month. And just to really recognize that small businesses are so important, but we saw, I think, this past year how important they are and critical to our health, our safety, our security, our daily activities. And as well, I'm really feeling this myself as well, to the cultural and entertainment pastimes that add so much richness and quality to our lives. So I just wanted to let you know and remind you, you've spoken about some of them. Of course, the Government of Canada, since the pandemic in March, has rolled out some programs. And in particular, I wanted to let you know that the FedDev Ontario Regional Recovery and Relief Fund, if some of you are familiar with that, or if not, it's referred to sometimes as RRF, along with all the other programs, are on canada.ca. So I encourage you to visit that website frequently just to see what's updated there and what might be available to help your businesses. So recently, that fund was just allocated another $184 million, bringing the total support to $436.4 million. So if some of you might not be aware of FedDev Ontario, we're the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, and the unit that I work for, called Small Business Services, we provide information on any programs and services that are available to small and medium-sized businesses, either starting or just functioning or even growing in Ontario. So I wanted to just flag that and invite you, of course, again, to visit us specifically on our website, fedevontario.gc.ca. All our services and information are free of charge, of course. And we also have information agents that work in our call center that will take calls and talk to you about your business and send a specialized information package that's relevant to you and your business. We're at 1-888-576-4444. So again, I just encourage you to visit our website and see what's there. Hopefully there's some resources there that will help you, and then give us a call. Outside of the information that they'll send you, we also have a secondary market research service that is free for clients who call in to us. So again, I'll just end off by saying how much I enjoyed the event today, and to thank all the organizers and everyone who was involved. And finally, just to say specifically to the Orangeville and area Small Business Enterprise Center, and everyone who works there, not just for their work putting on the event today, but their valued partnership with us and their efforts in helping and working with and servicing small businesses in the area all year round, in particular this year, 2020, which has had, of course, its unique challenges. So I wish everyone continued success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Franca. Those resources are always very much appreciated. So to wrap up today, I would like to, on behalf of TD Bank Group and our speaker, James Marple, the Town of Orangeville, and FedDev Ontario, I'd like to thank you very much for joining the 2020 Virtual Orangeville Economic Outlook Summit. Please be sure to take your ticket to one of our 4 participating businesses for your complimentary breakfast. You can redeem your coupon valued at $5 at one of the following restaurants: Mochaberry, Top Hat Tea Room, Son of a Chef, or the French Press. Enjoy your breakfast and have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.